Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to week 19 of our weekly Slow Stitch for 2024. I've angled the camera slightly differently because Stella wanted to be in. There she is, on the sofa. This week I want to look at imperfection, and I want to go even further than accepting, even further than embracing, but celebrating imperfection. And I'm going to do this in part by looking at the Japanese technique of Kintsugi that I talked about briefly last week when I was talking about visible mending. So we're going to make a piece inspired by that. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's go to my desk and get started without further ado. Okay, so this is what you will need for your piece this week. I've got as my backing this time a little scrap of wadding, or batting if you prefer. It's very low loft. I think it's a bit of Hobbs heirloom. I always want to say Hobbs heirloom. Anyway, if you don't have batting or wadding scraps, if you've got some flannel cotton, you could use 2 or 3 layers. If you don't have that, then some soft old sheet, 2 or 3 layers. You just want a little bit of fluff to fill your bubbles, because we're going to do the bubbles. And then I've got, for my foreground cloth, some dark blue. It's the darkest blue I had. It's a blue and black check, but you know, I'll go with it. I'd prefer plain. You could obviously use any colours at all. I'm just going for the blue because to me that says borrow, and we're being inspired by Kintsugi. And I think it's nice with the gold. Speaking of gold, I've got a few scraps of yellowish gold. You just need a little bit of each, maybe an inch or 1 3/4 inch squares of a few. If you've only got one piece of yellow or gold, of course you can just have all your squares the same, you know, it's just whatever you've got. And then I've got some yellow thread and some blue thread in case I want to do some background, some stitching on the background that's the foreground. And some basting thread. I'm not sure I'm going to use it, but it's there anyway. Needle, scissors, that's it. So, okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a flaw in the cloth. And I'm going to cut it, dear Henry. And I don't want to go diagonal to diagonal. I want it to be more organic. Sorry, I can't say that word without laughing now. I'm going to start somewhere about 1 inch away from this bottom corner. And I'm just going to do a very gentle wiggly curve. Whoops, don't cut through you. I can pick it up. It doesn't, you know, you're just making a crack in it. Think of a crack in porcelain. That's the idea. Just a bit more even than I would have liked, but anyway. You can't tear on the bias, obviously, it doesn't happen. So I'll have a gap like that, and through there will be my little gold bubbles. So I'm going to get a pencil. Sorry, you also need a pencil, as do I. Pencil, where are you? There's a pencil. It's a very old pencil. I'm just going to put a line, if it'll show up on my wadding, somewhere down the middle of that gap. I mean, it's a movable feast. Your gap can be as wide or as narrow as you like when you're done, but it's just to make sure that you put your pieces in roughly the right direction. I think I can just about see that, and now I can take those off, put them to one side, and now along that line that I can hardly see, I'm going to cut some squares, and they, you know, you don't have to measure them, just somewhere in the region of 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch. 1 1/4 inch is maybe to be on the safe side. And I'm just going to lay them so that that line kind of runs through the middle of them. And then I'm going to overlap them with each other. Let's have a bit of this shiny, tricksy stuff. Snippy fiskars that aren't very snippy. Yes, I will try and remember to buy some new when I'm in England. So now my line's coming here, so I just want that to overlap that by 1/4 inch or so, and sort of have the line coming through the middle of it, ish. I might tuck that under there because the cotton will then make it behave. Basically, we're going to put a circle in the middle of each of these squares. We're going to stitch around and leave the circle. So you just need to eyeball that you've got enough room to have a circle in the middle. You know, you can always trim bits off. You could always cut actual bigger circles. I just do squares and then, you know, trim later. So next we'll have a bit of cotton. I like to put cotton either side of the trixies. It's like if you've got a naughty child in the class, you put a well-behaved child either side in the hope that they keep them in line. I don't know how many I'm going to get. I might get 5, we'll see. We'll see. I have some of this, also a bit tricksy. This is actual silk from a cravat of my husband's that he had for years and never wore. I think he had it before I knew him. He came with it, so to speak, and he never wore it, and we didn't really live or go anywhere where one would wear a cravat, so in the end I just pinched it. One day I just took it. Right. And one more bit for the bottom. A bit of that. Right, so that's my line of gold. I'll come down a bit, I don't mind if it hangs off the bottom. I've done this before, but only on a sewing machine. I've done the circles by hand. You know, just put a circle of cloth or a square of cloth on the surface of another bit of cloth and hand stitch round and round. So yeah, I don't even know why I'm explaining myself. We're on a journey together as always. We'll see what happens. I've never done exactly this, but I've done, you know, as if I don't think you mind whether I've done it or not, really. I don't think you mind if it's a complete failure, to be honest, because it's all about the journey, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to get my bit of yellow. I've got 2 strands in my needle. This is not embroidery floss, it's a kind of silk, I think. But anyway, sort of the equivalent of 2 strands. And I've got 2 knots in the end. One I wanted, one I didn't. What's going on? Sorry, something's happened to my thread. It's broken. Well. No, it's very snappy, apparently. Let's try another bit. Sorry about that. Give it the snap test. Feels alright. I don't know why that's happened. Or it's just a dodgy bit of thread. It wasn't old thread, it was given to me. Well, it was. I did a workshop years and years ago. Many years ago. And we were, as part of the workshop, we were given a pack, and this silk was in it. And I subsequently dyed it with buddleia. Okay, I've got 2 strands in my needle, finally, of, you know, embroidery floss type thickness. Now, you don't want to do any stitching. If it helps you to draw circles on, go for it. You don't want any stitching in the middle of your circle. Your circle will be your negative space. So I'm just going to start by stitching a circle by eye just around my square. Oops, get my pin out. And then when I've done that, I can trim anything away that I don't think's necessary. Tiny, I'm doing small, I don't know why I'm doing small stitches, only to get around the curve really, I suppose. They don't have to be tiny really. Because when we start doing lots of round and round stitching, the stitches are all going across and overlap, and you know, they'll be there basically to just hide the background cloth and squash down the surrounding so that the little circle stands up like the bubble in a bit of bubble wrap. So I've gone round that one. And I'm going to go down. And now before I go and do the next one, I might just do a bit of trimming here. Do I need to? No, I don't need to. I'm going to just hop over to the next one on the back. And your circles don't have to be all the same size, or, you know, unless you want them to be. If you want them to be and you want to draw around a coin of your realm, wherever your realm may be, then, or, you know, or a button or something small and round, then you can absolutely do that. But we're all about this week embracing the imperfection. So, but like I always say, if that makes you nervous or unhappy, then don't do it. It's not a rule. There are no rules. Someone said recently in one of the comments that the only rule they've ever heard me say is you do you. And that's true. That's the only rule. Right, so now I've done that one. You see, I don't really mind if my last stitch, this thread is being very tricksy. I might have to change thread. We'll see how it goes. Can you see? So now I'm just going to, am I going to end off? I think I'm going to end off. It's not about backstory, and it's absolutely not about being neat. It's about conserving thread in this case. But you know, you do you. Sorry. Because I'm going to go here. Now, to start in this one, I'm going to start stitching on this side, because I'm going to end up back there, and then I'll be ready for the next one. And some of my circles are oval, and some are more like eggs, you know, with a point at one end. And I really don't mind. But that's me. I do mind that pin being in the way. I am quite hopeful, or I'm hoping that I can get all this stitching done in a reasonable length of time, or what constitutes a reasonable length of time in these Monday videos. We'll see. So that's 3 done. I have a feeling that my light has started flickering slightly. I hope it's not flickering for you. I hope it's not meaning it's on the blink, because it's not very old. And that would not be, I would not be happy. Got a snag thread there. Because I fear that it's not the kind of light that you can replace the bulb. Oh, that's made holes in the Trixie cloth. Hopefully they'll go away. You know that it will require being thrown away, which I'm sure you all know how I feel about things like that. I think most of us feel the same about things like that. Okie dokie. So now I need to go and do this one. I think I will jump. Just because it's this last bit of thread, and it's probably only just enough to do this anyway, so. Right, let's get that last pin away. So then, once I've gone around this last circle, I'm going to get my blue bits back in and just offer them up and kind of have a look where what will show, you know, when I put them on at the end. And maybe think about, is it worth putting them on now already, so I can see exactly where I'm supposed to be. Let's finish that off first. Once I get into the actual stitching, I'll talk more about, you know, interesting things, but let's get ourselves going down the right road first, Catherine. That's what I'm saying to myself. Right, so I've got those rather strange looking little squares held down by the line of rather wonky circles. So if I put this back on, I can see that I need to be... Now you can always make your circles smaller, you can always come inside them. So here I see that if I was outside that circle that I stitched, I'm going to have a bit of wadding showing. So I can put that back in and come inside that circle. And down here at the bottom the same. the same. I think, do you know what, I do think it is best to put this on first and then stitch inside, just so that you can see where your circles have to be. So before I do that, I'm just going to trim off a couple of these little pointy corners, like this one that's sticking up, but make sure that you don't trim off too much, it's just where it's sticking up. You want to make sure that you've still got cloth, yellow underneath. I mean, you can cover your wadding with stitching, but I'm hardly trimming anything. For you, it might not be necessary to trim anything at all. I'm going to baste these on because my circles are not in my gap. And if you're not stitching along and you haven't stitched circles, maybe don't bother. Maybe do this first and then stitch circles in your gaps. Right, I'm going to do invisible baste, I think. I must say that though, I do already love the look of it, with that gold shining through the gap. If you look up images of Kintsugi repair, you'll see and you can imagine the cracks in the porcelain, if you haven't seen it, mended with the gold. Put a couple of applique pins just to hold it. Sorry, my voice didn't. The first two words of that sentence didn't come out. They were three words, if you count a conjunction as two words. I'll put a couple of applique pins. So I'm just going to invisible baste about 1/4 of an inch away from that edge. And that far away, because then if I need to do something slightly under the edge, I can still get there. You see what I mean? So I wouldn't want to go right down the very edge in case I just need to gently fold it back out of the way for any reason. I'm just thinking ahead a bit. For a change. For a change. Right. I'm just making sure that my gap is pleasing. It doesn't have to be even. You could even, put these wonky if you wanted, and then if you wanted to trim them square, you could. Just whatever. And the principle is that you've got a little gap, like a crack in porcelain, through which you can see your little bits of gold. Oops. Stella. Fast asleep behind me as usual. I'm glad that she's calmed down a little bit after last week. Thank you so much to all of you for your condolences and your good wishes and your lovely messages about Sirius. I must say that, there was a lot of crying going on while I was reading your comments, but absolutely overwhelmed by your support and your love and your understanding, because I know, I'm not the only one to have lost a pet, and I'm not the only one who's grieved or is grieving for a pet. So thank you so much for that. It did take me much longer than usual to go through all your comments because, I could only manage to read a few at a time. But they were each and every one truly appreciated. Right, enough sadness for today. Okay, so that's there. I think, shall I whip round the edge as well? I might as well while I'm about it. Just going to go around the outside as well. And then we can get on to I was going to say the fun stitching, but I actually like doing invisible baste, so it's not a stage I feel I have to get through to get to the fun part, because I do enjoy doing it. Yes, Kintsugi, I don't know if I said, means golden repair or golden joinery. And I think, I mean, I'm by no means an expert on Japanese culture. This is only from what I've read and what I understand. And if I'm making any mistakes or whatever, I hope that it's not taken as a sign of disrespect. But I believe that originally it comes from the porcelain associated with the Japanese tea ceremony. And it kind of resonated with me a little bit about my grandmother being against waste, as was, you know, not uncommon in that generation through need and thrift, and you know, and saying waste not, want not was a expression, meaning that if you don't waste, you won't ever be wanting. I don't think it's actually true, but I appreciate the sentiment behind it. And there's plenty of people that don't waste anything but are still without. Yeah, it's a little bit of a silly expression really when you unpick it, but it's valuing, it's giving value to things, objects, isn't it? Am I making any sense at all? Whoops, I pulled my pin out inadvertently, and I've done that to my, I'm going to do my trick that I seem to have been doing a lot of recently, getting a needle with a bigger eye, so I can easily, or more easily, thread it and get it to the back and just leave it. That'll do pig, it's basting. So now I've got my little line of yellow. If you weren't going, if you weren't going to stitch the circles first, you would have had to hold them down in some way, shape or form. So I'm going to switch to this as slightly thicker thread. It's like a cotton pearl. It's actually naturally dyed with tagetes, African marigolds, but you know, you don't have to have naturally dyed thread, of course. You can just have some yellow thread. But it's a cotton pearl sort of weight, so it's a bit thicker, because I want some bulk to my stitches. So I'm also taking a bigger needle than is my usual. I think that's a 7. I'm not completely sure, it's not written on it, and if it was I wouldn't be able to read it anyway. So, and now I'm just going to redefine those circles so that they are visible within. Can you see what I'm doing if I stop waving it around? Do you see this circle here is slightly disappearing under that edge, so I'm just going to round it off so it's within what can be seen. And I'm just going to do that by stitching over my previous stitches, because now we're basically thread painting, I suppose, in a way. We just want to fill up the area outside the circle with as much thread as we can. So I'm just going to go round that and make it slightly smaller so it all shows. You see already it's starting to fluff up a bit. And you can go around a couple of times. You can go around again and fill in your gaps where you didn't stitch the first time. I guess you could do back stitch if you wanted to, but I'd rather go round and round with forward stitch. I think you get sort of a smoother curve that way. And you can either finish this little piece in its entirety and then move on to the next one, or you can just do all your circles first once and then work up and down. I talk about that when I do eyelet stitch, you know, that I go around once and then go around and fill in, and sometimes I go around several times. I think I just would rather do that. I'm going to stab through there. So what we'll be aiming for once we've stitched the circles is then to just fill all this in as well. Do you see all this? So all this, in an ideal world, will be entirely covered by stitching. So I'm just going to go from here, and I'm going to do kind of long and short stitches, which is a filling, embroidery filling stitch. But I'm really just covering that whole area with thread, any old how. just staying outside my circle. If you want to do a neater sort of satin stitch, you can, or you could just do very small close together seed stitching. Anything, just to cover that area with thread. Because when you're doing free machine embroidery, which was when I used to do this all the time, you just keep stitching round and round and round until you've covered. So you've covered all that. So the only bit of cloth that shows is the inner circle. And I don't mind if I split my stitches or what happens. I'm just going all over. I might do a super long one there. And I just want it to look like texture rather than the actual pattern of the stitch being anything on its own. And if you've matched your thread colour to your cloth, then it doesn't matter if there's little gaps, you know, it's just the overall impression. I'm just going to go back round and do the top bit a little bit towards the edge there. And if you want to stitch 2 or 3 lines around your circle first as well, I might just echo that a bit, just so it's really defined as a circle. You can do that. You see, it will take quite a lot of thread. So if you've got something like a cotton pearl, then great. Otherwise, maybe 3 strands of embroidery floss when you come to the filling in the background. I think I might leave this top part curvy rather than straightening it off. I don't know. You're flattening down the back so that the little circle stands up proud. I think I'm just going to leave it with an edge like that. I just feel I need one more stitch in there. Sorry about my thumb. If you're actually watching what I'm doing. One more. one more. Just till it looks right. That's okay. I'm going to come back round here. And just follow the curve of that circle round again. A bit more. And then just fill in behind it. And also I like to see that where those two, that's where those 2 stitches meet. I'm going to stitch past that. I don't want all the stitches meeting on along the same line. I'm just filling that in. So do you see my little bubble? I mean, obviously I need to do way more. Way more stitching down here, but already the little bubble is defined. And especially when you come to the junction between 2 bits of cloth, you want to make sure that you stitch across that junction. You know, like right over it like that. See what I mean? So it gets really trapped down and hidden. And imagine if you made a huge, great big piece of this by hand. Well, that would take a heck of a lot of thread. But I think it would be quite a wonderful thing. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I've made quite big things on the sewing machine doing this. If you are a free motion stitcher on the sewing machine, I used to lay all my squares on in exactly the same way, and then stitch straight lines along all the edges of the squares, just with a neutral, you know, with a straight stitch to anchor everything, and then switch to free motion and start stitching a circle in the centre of every square, and then just scribble about filling in between, you know, if you're wanted to have a go at that and you're a free motion stitcher. So I'm to this other circle down below in this gold. I'm going to just define it a bit because it's gone a bit under the edge. I don't think I mind if the edge of my circle is right on the edge of the blue cloth, because I do think I'm going to come down when I finish doing my circles and do something on the edge of the blue. I don't know if it'll be an overcast stitch or a running stitch closer to the edge or something like that. I'm not there yet. And obviously the bigger you make your circles, the less space you leave in between, the less filling in stitch you have to do, and vice versa. So it's just, that's gone super wonky there. It's very wiggly. I'm just going to put another stitch over it to even it up a bit. That's better. So yeah, so when you're stitching around your circle, your stitches need to be quite small to get round the curve. But once you're in between and the filling in, you can do bigger stitches. If you didn't like the idea of this, or you know, all this heavy stitching in between, you could just do one strip of a gold cloth and then just stitch a little circle, or you know, several little circles along its length, and not do all this filling in. That would be another option if this looks to you like not fun, or you think it's using too much thread, or you know, it wants to poke up. I'll just poke it back under. There I did have a tiny bit of wadding showing, but I've just managed to cover it with stitching. And the wadding is a creamy colour against the yellow, so it's not super noticeable. How many more stitches can I get out of this little bit? Maybe one more. Maybe one more. Right. Let's finish it off on the back. Just excuse me one moment. I'm back. I'd written some things down, and I'd left it over there, some things I wanted to talk about. I'm still struggling to keep things in my brain a little bit. It's partly because I'm going to England on Thursday, so I've got, you know, things in my head to do with that. My commonplace book hasn't taken up all the excess that my brain has to keep. Oh yes, I wanted to also mention wabi-sabi, or wabi-sabi. I'm not a Japanese speaker, I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced, but it's the celebration of the imperfection. It goes further than accepting imperfection, it actually celebrates the imperfection. And this tradition of Kintsugi is part of that ethos. Now like I said, I'm not by no means an expert on Japanese culture. And there are spiritual connotations with wabi-sabi that I don't know much about. But I've seen wabi-sabi talked about in relation to art in particular. And that's my interest in it, and my focus on it is from that point of view. That it actually celebrates the imperfection. I've now got a great long length of thread. But it does get used up pretty quickly, so... And the transience of things. And there's another expression, which is mono no ware. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'll write all these terms in the description below, and then you can go and look them up if you want to know more about them. Which one translation of it, it's very difficult to translate exactly from one language to another to get the connotations, you know, even from French to English, which are fairly close languages. There are a lot of Latin, you know, common roots through Latin and so on. even there, you can't really say, I'm going to go off on a tangent now. Can you sense it? Can you sense the tone in my voice as I think of something that I want to witter on about? Yes, you can't really say what's the word for that in French. I mean, if it's some simple thing like a table, then you can. It's la table. It's, again, exactly the same word, different pronunciation. But if you start getting into more complex ideas or so on, you can't really translate words in isolation because there's so much other stuff around the word. And there are some words that in English we have the same word for two different concepts, and in French they're completely different words. An example of that is my dad, bless him, who lived here in France for the last years of his life and did his best to, speak a bit of French and understand and so on. Had a delivery of, I think it was building sand. He was doing something, around the house. And the delivery chap turns up with the tipper truck, with the sand in, and asked my dad where he wanted it. Now, my dad had sort of anticipated this question and thought about where he wanted his sand, and he'd gone and looked up in the dictionary what was the French word for next, because he wanted it next to his shed. So the French guy says, okay, bonjour monsieur, vous voulez votre sable or whatever, where do you want your sand? And my dad said, prochaine la cabane, because he'd looked up the French for next and he'd come across the word prochaine, which does mean next in French, but not in space. It means next in time if you're saying next week or the next day. So I think the guy, and so to the French guy, my father's not speaking English, he had no idea what my father meant. An English French speaker would make the connection between next and next. And that's what I mean about it. You can't just translate words in isolation, you need to know the context. And often different cultures are reflected, aren't they, in the language? Well, always, not often, always. Language is how we express ourselves, obviously. So I'm very, very careful with not making my stitches all even like that. I'm now doing stem stitch, I don't know why. I'm going to go at an angle to it. And especially when I'm talking about cultures that I have very little knowledge about. So what was what was I talking about? Mono no aware. I'm probably not even close to the pronunciation, but it's MONO space NO and then AWARE. It looks like the English word aware, but it actually translates as, or one translation of it is the pathos of things, and it's about the awareness of things having impermanence and being transient. And that's all tied up also with the concept of wabi sabi. Wabi sabi. I mean, I wouldn't and this is why I'm keeping the focus of my mentioning wabi sabi on the art and that concept of it. I wouldn't even begin to start delving into other people's spiritual practices. That's why I don't really want to talk about that or be drawn on the subject. But when I've talked before about other textile cultures, in Kawandi Week we talked more about respecting traditions. I do think that you can respect and explore aspects of traditions that are not your own, but and learn what you can, But if you sit here talking about it to all you lovely people, then I just feel I have to be super careful. Now you see how heavy the stitching is now compared to the little areas of bubble. Whoops. And I'm also being careful with my tension. I should maybe have mentioned that sooner. I mean, it's inevitable when you do this amount of heavy stitching and that's in fact what we're playing with. You know, the heavy stitching pulling the back cloth down and the little circles popping forward. But there's one thing having a nice flattened back area and a little puffy circle, and another thing if you pull it super tight and you end up with, you know, puckers and unpleasantness going on. Yeah, it's those three, just to finish off what I was saying about the Japanese concepts that I've mentioned. The three keys are that nothing lasts, nothing is permanent, nothing is ever finished, which, you know, kind of, to me ties into the concept of journey and process that I talk about quite a lot, and that nothing is perfect. Those three things. And I just think that that absolutely and utterly fits within the ethos of Slowstitch. And because I mentioned Kintsugi last week in passing, talking about visible mending, I thought it was worthy of a week to itself kind of thing. And also many of you had asked about the bubbles, and this just seemed to be the perfect way to use the bubbles. The bubbles that were in Earth when we did Earth in Earth Week. So I'm down to my next circle. I'm just emphasising it a bit more by going round and making sure that I'm within the bounds of my little fissure. Fissure. Not fissure as in the fisherman, but a fissure as in the crack between some rocks. So again, I'm going to have to make my circle slightly smaller because it's disappearing under the edge of the... I'm doing backstitch apparently. Sometimes it's as if your hands just start doing something and your brain hasn't intervened in any way, shape or form. Do you know the feeling? Yeah, I think backstitch works fine. Ignore what I said about not doing backstitch, but I seem to be doing a stabbing backstitch or a chicken backstitch rather than doing in and out in one movement. Now you see I said that and suddenly I've done a right angle. But no matter, it can be put right. It's not a line of stitching that has to stand alone. It's just defining, and then it's going to have lots more stitching around it. This I don't usually or often use pearl cotton because I prefer a more matte thread. So I usually use embroidery floss. I don't know why I'm saying usually in that slightly ridiculous way. But for this, I think because of the gold, the pearl cotton, because it's got that sheen to it, is just the job. You know, everything has its place. We might say that we prefer this, that or the other, but then sometimes it's like with the colour thing, you know, I'm not known, certainly by you lovely people who've only met me at the end of last year, for my bright colours. I used to be known for bright colours, but however, Wonky Wednesday a couple of weeks ago I had the urge to do a colour wheel and out came all the bright colours. One more in there to fill in that little bit. And then I'll just go over this side now. See that bit of gold there from my husband's aforementioned cravat? Because it's nearly the same colour as the thread, I could afford to leave bigger gaps really. Whereas this here, which is a piece of my husband's shirt dyed with onion skins, is much darker than the thread, so I think it's going to take a bit more covering. I'm going to take some big stitches to start with. That's something else you can do. You can just go across with bigger stitches and then come back and fill in. Because this isn't really long and short stitch in any, you know, embroidery terms, defined sense of the word. That wasn't good grammar, but you know what I mean. This is just stitches that happen to be longer and shorter than each other. I am not, and never have been, an embroiderer. I know how to do some of the stitches properly, if I have to. I never really liked the formality of it, and the rules, and the no knots. If it's your thing, I'm absolutely not criticising, as always. But it's just not for me. There's a movement called contemporary embroidery, which is for me, and that's kind of, I don't know what real embroiderers think about contemporary embroidery. I don't know if there's any kind of beef between those two groups. People get riled up about things. Each to their own is what I say. As long as you're not trying to make me do your thing, you go do your thing, you do you, and let me do me. It's kind of the other half of that, isn't it? Right. So you could just keep going round and round the circles until the two circles touched, and then fill in the gaps in between. There's, you know, just while you're doing it, just look at what's happening. Observe what you're doing and what the result is, and think about what you like and what you don't like. You don't have to do it my way. I'm not going to start singing Frank Sinatra. Just try and see the principle of what I'm doing. And if you achieve that in a different way, then great. In fact, I love it when I see, well, I love both things. I love it when I see people have produced what I've shown. That is lovely to see. But I also love it when people produce something completely different to what I've shown, but within the same, you know, with the theme, or just the whole, and everything in between those two. The whole variety is just lovely to see, all of it. Right, I need some more of my gold thread. I hope this isn't, I hesitate to use the word boring stitching for any of you. If it is, then, you know, do something different, because it is the same over and over again. But and some people will like that. Some people like the mindfulness of it, because you're filling in space, and that was what I always liked doing this on a sewing machine. I have said before that I think it can fall into the ethos of slow stitch, even if you're using a sewing machine. I can remember happily doing this for hours at a time with the sewing machine, and all you're thinking about is making your little circles and getting a knot in your thread and filling in between. Here's my back. I wonder how many of you are looking at your backs, not your own backs, but the backs of your work, who weren't before, because, you know, I didn't invent looking at backs of work. It's a very well-known thing. And in the real quilting world, I know some people are irritated by it. I'm quite a well-known quilter, whose name I can't remember, and if I could I wouldn't say it, but once said, gets so irritated, people always want to see the back, and I say, well, the art's on the front. But that is a thing in quilt shows. They come round with their white gloves on to lift it up to show you the back, because you're not allowed to touch. I think in quilting it's because you can see the quilting stitches more clearly on the back without all the pattern on the front going on. But yeah, my last big piece for exhibition, not this exhibition that's happening next week, or actually it's opened already, but I'll be there next week, had a little string hanging on it with a label saying, "Please look at the back." And the back was, some will call it a hot mess. I'll try and remember when I'm in England to take a little video of it. It's hanging on my friend's wall in England. That's where it lives. Because a few of you have asked about it and I keep mentioning it. There is way back on Instagram some pictures of it. But anyway, it's got nothing to do with this really in particular. It's the piece I'm stitching in the little photo of me in my Icelandic Radari sweater that you see on the front of every video. Me in my green sweater, smiling at you. That's what's on my lap. And it's called Everything's Connected to Everything Else. I went quiet. I was filling in my spaces with my stitching. Yeah, and I know that many of us have had the experience as children or even as adults of expectation. I know I certainly have. I was lucky at school in that I was okay academically, I could keep up and do the work and so on. But I had one teacher in particular, a maths teacher, who no matter how well I did, even if I did quite well, said I could do better. And it was such a pressure. And I don't know if he said it to other people. I don't think. I'm talking about secondary school, so I would have been 11 to 16, 15, 16, that kind of age. I don't think we really sat around discussing things like that then. Certainly my daughter with her friends talks more about grades. I mean, she's at university now, but more discussion. I don't know if that's just because that's my daughter and that was me, or because it's a generation thing, or because we're now in France and that's different. No clue. But anyway, I do remember getting a report with good grades, good test results, and thinking, oh great, proud of myself, I did okay. And then reading down at the bottom his comments, Catherine could do better. Maybe he was trying to encourage me. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what was in his head? All I know what was in mine was, but I did well. I did well. Just appreciate that I did well and don't tell me to do more. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think I felt there that, had to be perfect, had to get 100% in every test in order to please this person. Nothing less would do. I'm doing back stitches again. I don't care. Do you know what? I feel rebellious. And it was only myself telling me I shouldn't do back stitches. So don't ever should or shouldn't yourself. Or, sometimes we have to. Some things we just have to do, aren't there? Adulting things like, tax returns and laundry and all that stuff. But when we're doing our stitching, we shouldn't should ourselves. and I certainly don't want to should you. If ever you feel I'm shoulding you, you have my entire permission to shout at me as loud as you like. This is strange, it's polyester, polyester. I'm being really careful not to pull it tight because I can see that it wants to pucker just when I look at it, so it doesn't have the backbone of silk, the character. Sorry, I was holding my breath because I was concentrating, and it's hard to talk when you're holding your breath. Whoops. When I say whoops in that, sometimes I say it here when, for example, if I'm in the supermarket and I drop my purse or something, you know, and I might be in the supermarket, I might have seen someone I know, which happens quite often in our local supermarket. It's a social hub. So I might be chatting in French to a friend or neighbour, and then I'm chatting in French to the woman on the till, or the man on the till. So I'm all, you know, in French mode, French, and I drop my purse and I go, whoops. I might as well have a big sign on my head saying, English. It's such an English thing to say. Do you say whoops? I'm sure you say whoops. It's more the accent, I think, and the way, or oops-a-daisy. Whoops-a-daisy. I feel very English when I say whoops. I'm sure my American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, South African, and all the other Anglophonic friends here. Have I missed out any? I'm talking Anglophones. I know that Dutch and Scandinavians and so forth, you all speak English better than we do a lot of the time. But, you know, people with English as their native language, their mother tongue. Do you say whoops? Do you know what I mean when I go whoops-a-daisy in the supermarket and I suddenly feel very English? My son, Joey, when he was little, he doesn't watch anymore. He's bless him, he looks every now and then at my channel and goes through doing a thumbs up on every video just to support me, but he doesn't sit through them anymore. In the beginning he watched a bit here and there, but I think now he's completely, you know, it's too much for him. But anyway, so I can talk about him without him knowing. When he was little, when he fell over, he would get up and he'd say, oops-a-diddly dumpling. And I don't know where he got it from. I don't think I ever said it to him. I'm not aware that I did. Unless he got it from another child at school or, you know, nursery school or whatever. Oops-a-diddly dumpling. So now when I hear oops or whoops, I hear myself say it, I add the diddly dumpling in my head. I'm not going to go around saying that in a French supermarket. You really would think I was a nutcase. Crazy English woman. Right, I'm getting down to my last bubble. I've also had that song in my head all since I started thinking about bubbles. You know, I'm not going to sing it to you. Don't make me sing. I'm not singing and I'm not reading the Wonky Donkey. I'm forever blowing bubbles. In England, there's an English football club called West Ham United, and that's their theme song. That's the song that they sing. I'm forever blowing bubbles. So I looked it up, and it is quite an old song. I think it's from the early 1900s, and it was written by, I think it was written by 3 people. I can't remember the name. Honestly, my brain, I should have written it down in my commonplace book. It was written by 3 people, and it's listed under, and their 3 names, parts of their 3 names are stuck together to make a new name. So you see it was written by whatever the word is, and you think that's a strange name, but it's three different people's names, unless I'm entirely misremembering. But I think it was written in the early 1900s. But when you listen to the words, or you read the words, it's really very sad and melancholic. Because the I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles part, to me, sounds kind of joyous, because I associate bubbles with, you know, joyousness, and seeing bubbles float away and into the air, and, you know, it's great fun, isn't it, blowing bubbles? But then the song says, they fly so high, nearly reach the sky, just like my dreams, they fade and die. Yeah, it's a bit of a downer. And how does it go on? Fortune's always smiling. No, sorry, that would be nice. No, fortune, if I'd written it, that's what I would have said. Fortune's always hiding, I've looked everywhere, I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. In order to try and put something positive spin on it, I would say, well, even though fortune may be hiding, and even though they fade and die, I'm still going to go on blowing them. Triumph of hope over experience again. Anyway, so if anybody knows, you know, what the people that wrote that song had in mind, or what it actually means, or is it, you know, does it have hidden meaning, or is it just a little song, I would like to hear. And if anybody's a West Ham supporter, up the Hammers. That's what they say. So West Ham supporters. And it means, you know, well done them, or let them do well, in case you're not up with the London parlance of football speaking. I do know their strip that they play in, their kit, is called Claret and Blue. It's like a dark red and blue, but they refer to it as Claret and Blue. Right, I'm going to need yet another bit of new thread. And I only know that because when I was very young, I had a boyfriend who was a West Ham supporter. A long, long time ago. And I'm talking about soccer, obviously, I'm sure. My American friends know that, and not what you call football. In England, football is, you know, football. And but you call it soccer, don't you, to distinguish it from what we do. You just call it football, I think. Everybody else calls it American football. Do you just call it football, or do you call it American football as well? Like when I asked my French friend and neighbour what the stitch, the French knot, is known as in France, and she said we just call it a knot. I don't think it's true, because she's not really a stitcher. I don't know, I must look it up. But it was just funny the way she said it. Can't find my end. There it is. So, do you see? Can you look up if you're stitching? Do you see the bubble and the texture contrast? It is worthy of the effort, I think. I do think it's worthy of the effort. It's obviously taking me, you know, if I'd been doing this on a sewing machine, I'd have had about a square yard done by now. But it's about the journey, not the end result. Wish I could thread my needle. Right, good. So yeah, I would about the perfection, the desire for perfection thing. Am I going to mention her again, Mrs. Taverner? Poor woman. That was with any teachers in any subject, it's so important, isn't it? I mean, like my maths teacher, I don't mind maths. I see the necessity for it. You know, I'm not even bad at it. I'm okay at it. I can get basic concepts like 1 and 1 is 2. I can work out the area of a circle from its radius and, you know, all that kind of stuff. It was very useful when I was a normal quilter. And it still is. And, you know, that thing about the square on the hypotenuse and all that stuff, Pythagoras, it is useful. The times tables, obviously. I have nothing against maths, luckily. But I can't even remember why I started ranting about maths now. Yes, oh yes, I can remember. The maths teacher put me off it, you know. Who knows, I might have been a famous mathematician. I might have got the Nobel Prize for mathematics if only he'd inspired me more than... I'm being facetious. I don't think I would ever have had the Nobel Prize. Is there a Nobel Prize for mathematics? But my point is, because he was... whatever he, you know, I don't know what his motivation was for the way he was. I hope he wouldn't get away with some of the things now. I'm not talking about, you know, physical violence or anything, but we would have a weekly test to make sure that we'd grasped the whatever concept it was he taught us that week. And then he would sit us in the class in order of how well we'd done in the test. So there were all tables in lines, long tables, you know, in rows, one behind the other. And then the people that did the best would sit at the back, and the people that did the least best sat at the front. So you were ranked. And I mean, I just think that's awful. I'm sorry. Maybe it's me. But to physically put you, you know, so everybody knows how smart or not, whatever you want to call it, everybody is, by being sat in a certain spot in the classroom. And it's also like saying, you know, you can trust the smart kids so they can sit at the back, whereas the struggling kids have to sit at the front under my nose. And it wasn't so that he could give them more help. He had a mean streak. I really hope there aren't still teachers like that these days. And I wonder how many of those poor kids that sat at the front were really scarred by it. Anyway. So, yeah, my point was, the teacher, if you get a good, inspiring... I mean, I love English literature. I already did. At school, I had a teacher who wasn't that great. I mean, he didn't really, you know, make you hate literature. He just wasn't very inspiring. He was sort of neutral. He got you through the exam kind of teacher. But then at A-level, I had a wonderful English teacher, Alec Laurie, who loved literature, and it was his mission to teach you to love it as much as he did, you know, and getting you through the exam was secondary. And we would read, you know, and he would read aloud. He would get us to read aloud and to feel the language in your mouth and, you know, hear the sounds of the words. And he was just brilliant. And then at university, although I did library studies, I did a minor in English literature. 2 courses. One was feminist literature, and the other was tragedy and comedy in literature. And the chap, I can't remember his name, who taught us. Isn't that funny? That was later than Alec Laurie. I do remember Alec Laurie, but I don't remember this other chap's name. Anyway, he was a great teacher as well. He loved literature, but he did love the sound of his own voice, and he did think that he was in a Willie Russell play. He wore tweed jackets with leather elbow patches, you know, and the minute the sun was vaguely shining, bearing in mind this was the Midlands in England, I went to Loughborough University, we would be all sitting outside on the grass under a tree, and he would read to us. And he had a very mellifluous voice. I love that word, mellifluous. The root of it is from honey. A voice like honey. And French for honey is miel. But anyway, he liked the sound of his honey voice. So we'd sit under the trees and he'd read to us. And I don't think he really taught us much. I think we sort of got ourselves through the exams, but you know. But he did inspire a love of literature because he loved it as well. Still can't remember his name. But you can have a subject that you love and you can have a bad teacher. Or a bad teacher. An uninspiring teacher, shall we call it. Teachers are people too. Teachers are some of my favourite people. I have been a teacher myself. So, you know, I'm not here to diss teachers. I suppose there's an element of teaching to what I'm doing here, sitting here now. But they have such a responsibility, teachers, don't they? Especially of kids. You know, as grown-ups, you would hope that we were a bit more resilient. Not always the case. But teachers of kids have such a huge role to play. Which is vaguely linked to the theme of this week, which is embracing imperfection. Okay, I am nearly around my final bubble. I'm forever blowing bubbles. If you know it and you want to sing it, you go for it. It'd be lovely if we were all in one big room, and then I would lead a sing-along, but I'm not doing a solo sitting here when I can't hear you all joining in. It's a kind of song that one would sing on a coach trip, you know? You know, is that a thing in other places? In England, if you went on a coach trip ever, there was always a sing-song, usually started by the people at the back of the coach. And yes, I was usually one of those. I did a lot of Amdram when I was at school and sixth form college. And singing in school productions and choir, and you know. I still like to sing, but I'm not singing here. Right. So I'm just going to go around this the top of this last little bubble a bit, just to define it a bit more. And then I'm going to seem to be chicken stitching more than going in and out. I don't know if that's because of the wadding or because of the nature of the stitching, and I think I've mostly been doing that all the way up. Right. I have a feeling I feel like I might as well do a bit more, since I've still got, oh dear, look what's happened. Never mind. Never mind, Miss Taverner won't see it. Okay, I'll just do a couple more around here and then call it a day. And then go and do something along the blue edge. Not sure what yet. That will do pig, donkey, goat. I'm going to add goat to the list because a lady was talking about her goats. She had 9 goats and she was going to put goat treats in her tie-on pocket that she was going to make. And I said, please give the goats a treat from me. I never met a goat I didn't like. So anyway, that'll do pig, donkey, goat. It's like a game that you play, isn't it, when you have to remember all the things in a list. That was it. I packed my bag and in it I put apples. We used to do it like that, and then B, C, D, etc. But you have to remember all the previous ones. Okay, so that's my so far. I think I'm just going to do a little overcast just to squash the edge down, and I might do some up and down stitches in the blue as well. I'm not sure yet. I'll start with the overcast and see where I get to. I can get myself some blue. It's slightly too bright, this blue, but it'll do. Pig, donkey, goat. Sorry. Can't get too many animals, otherwise the whole video will just be me listing animals. Let's go down, do a smaller needle now, so it's down to 2 strands of normal floss. I should make myself more often use different numbers of strands, or make myself, you know. I should encourage myself to experiment with using different numbers of strands of floss, because there's one thing doing something because you prefer it and you actually like it. At one point I think it can just become a habit, and you do it just without thinking, without being mindful of why you're doing it. So I think that's maybe something to bear in mind. I'm just going to do, I'm not even sure, I'm going to see what the needle does and follow it. Yeah, I'm just going to do little overcast stitches, more or less invisible, just so that edge just sits down nicely to frame the gold. I could have done, see, it probably would have made more sense to do 1 strand of floss if I wanted it to be less visible. So I don't even know if you can see. If you even want to look, you know what I'm saying. I'm just basically tacking the edge down with little overcast stitches. You're going, yeah, yeah, Catherine, we know what an overcast stitch is. We don't have to see. Luckily, because I'm doing blue on blue again. But it does just makes a, I wouldn't say it's a cleaner edge necessarily, it's just a more pleasing edge. It's strange, the feeling of wadding nowadays, because I hardly use it. Well, I don't buy it anymore, but I've got the odd scrap. This piece was, I was going through a box. I've got a stack of wooden boxes, and the bottom box has got all kinds of bits and bobs in that I've started and not gone on with, you know, just little sample pieces. And it was in there with some kind of beginning of a collage that I don't even remember starting. So I got all the, I know it was a long time ago because it was normal basting, it wasn't the Jude Hill invisible baste. So it must have been 15 years ago or more. So I thought, well, you're not going anywhere, so there was just a few bits of quite nice cloth tacked on, so I just got them off, got the basting stitches out, and that was to this bit of wadding, which had been machine stitched. You see the machine stitching to the bit of flannel on the back. So I thought, well, that's a stroke of luck. Just when I was looking for a scrap of wadding, there's one. I feel tired all of a sudden. I think I've been sleeping the best. You know that feeling when you suddenly slump? It's probably also because I didn't have much for breakfast. I need to have 11s when I've said goodbye to you all. I'll go and have 11s. I don't know what the time is, but I'm having 11s anyway. So I'm home alone this week. Hans gone away to work, so I eat when I'm hungry, I drink when I'm dry. So when Hans is here, I have to be a bit more structured because he often has Zoom meetings and things at certain times. So we have to have lunch at certain times. Yeah, this is definitely worth doing. I don't know if you can see a difference, but whoops, don't come up in your bubble. And if you do a large area of these bubbles, or with little different scraps of cloth,
It's quite intriguing for people that don't know how it's done, because if you really hide the edges of the little squares, you can create like a mosaic of squares of cloth. Basically, that's what I used to do. An entire area covered with the little squares of cloth that I then did, stitch like this. So you completely hide the fact that it's all lots of different bits of cloth, and all you see are all the different coloured little circles. Great fun. So one day I'll show you some more of the pieces that I did. A few people have asked, since I've shared some of the pieces I used to make by machine, about me talking in more detail about my, how I got to where I am in terms of my stitching. And I will talk about that more as we go along. I'll have to remember, you'll have to remind me. But basically, I'll give you a brief rundown while I just stitch down this other side. Just sneaking across the back with my needle. I started sewing when I was quite young, as many of us did. My mum made a lot of dresses and trouser suits and things. I think I talked last week about the crimpline trouser suits. The brass buttons, double-breasted with brass buttons, and a brine nylon shirt to go underneath. I mean, does that sound like me at all, people? I don't think so. Anyway, bless her, she was trying to make me look smart. She still tries to make me look smart. She still hasn't given up. Anyway, so yeah, she was dressmaking, so inevitably you see your mum doing something and you want to copy. So I started stitching bits of cloth together. I was too little to be allowed to use a sewing machine at that stage, so I was given a needle and thread, and then I started doing patchwork because I was given little scraps. So what can you do but sew them together? And then at one point, I think I was probably in my early teens, I certainly remember with my best friend at school, who was also called Catherine, doing patchwork with hexagon templates that we cut out of scraps of old paper. I have no clue where we learnt about it. It would not have been the internet, because there was no internet. I don't think it was at school either, because Miss Taverner came later. And I don't think she taught us English paper piecing. She taught us other less fun things. But I do remember sitting around with my friend Kathy. She was Kathy and I was Kate at school. We actually disliked each other in the beginning because we were the two Catherines in the class. And when the teacher said Catherine, we both thought the teacher meant us and were irritated if it was the other one. But eventually we ended up best friends. And one day we sat down and said, right, one of us is going to be Kathy and one of us is going to be Kate. And we literally drew the names, or folded bits of paper. And she got Kathy and I got Kate. So all through school I was known as Kate. And into sixth form and at university. And I can't remember when or why I switched back to Catherine. But anyway, not really relevant to the story. But I do remember sitting with my friend Kathy when I was Kate, watching Wimbledon. I've always loved watching Wimbledon. My mother loves watching Wimbledon as well. I've been there when I lived in England. We used to go there. That's another digression. And Kew. I won't go down that road now, but probably during Wimbledon fortnight I will go more into that. But I used to sit with my friend Kathy doing English paper piecing and watching Wimbledon. I have very clear memories of us doing that and making cushions and bags, tote bags type things and things like that. And then it kind of fell away. I think I always did something. I've always done knitting. In the 80s I was always knitting myself leg warmers and things, because I was one of the kids from Fame, in my head at least. And it wasn't really until sort of my 30s that I got back into patchwork. And then I went straight back to the English paper piecing because that's what I knew. And using scrap cloth and working by hand. And then I went to live in France for the first time when Lily was born. And there I started looking at the internet and YouTube, funnily enough, and I came across a video of somebody doing piecing, making a quilt on a sewing machine. To me, this was a new thing. I've led a sheltered life, as you all know, even without giant paper clips up until very recently. So that sent me down the rabbit hole of that, and I had a bog standard domestic sewing machine, so I started doing that. And then at one point, there's a very famous long arm quilter. She's got tattoos. I can't remember her name, but I came across a video of hers on YouTube, and she was doing free motion with a long arm, but she was driving it. It wasn't computer. It was her driving it. And I was just astounded by this, and I thought, oh yeah, but you need a long arm. And then I discovered that you don't need a long arm, you can do it on a domestic sewing machine. So then I taught myself to do that, and I got completely seduced by the whole doing stuff on by machine, and buying cotton, quilter's cotton, and that whole thing. And that's me down to the second line, so the rest of that story will have to wait for another day. I don't know if I even do want to do anything at the sides. I think it would detract. I think I'm just leaving it like that. Maybe I'll just stitch around the edge. I'm even a bit, I nearly never do this, I'm going to take my invisible baste out. Yes, you heard me right. And then you'll see how difficult it is to take out if you haven't tried it before yourself. Actually, I'm going to take it out just along the two sides of the fissure. I don't know why I feel the need to say fissure in that silly way, so I don't. But you see, it is quite a job. Because you maybe can't see, but those tiny dots of beige drops, cut that, are distracting my eye. I probably should have used a dark grey or something. It's because I used the beige on the dark blue. That's completely stuck, that one. See those little back stitches? Nope, doesn't want to come. Really lock that in there. You really have to pull at it. It doesn't come out like normal basting. That's better. Except for that, see that one tiny one that's going to bug me? I'm going to pick at it. Got it. I'm taking the other side out now. There you go, you see, never say never. You never have to take it. Oh, you don't have to. I didn't have to. I just decided I wanted to. I cut it there. It's easier then. I don't mind that thread being wasted in inverted commas because it's a vintage silk coat. So you have to remind me where I was up to in the story of my stitching journey. But in all that time, just to fill in the gaps of all that time. Yes, I'm going to leave the ones around the edge, but I'm now going to just do some running stitch around the edge in this same blue and endeavour to stitch over those dots as I go. Or shall I just get them out as well? Today's the day when I change my mind 500 times. I'm going to get them out as well. Yeah, there was never a time when I didn't do something crafty. And I mean, in the crafting sense, not sneaky. Although that's probably also true. Knitting, those embroidery kits that you buy, with a picture printed on and then you fill in. I've got one downstairs of some elves watching a fairy singing on a little stage. It's like a woodland scene. I think that's the only real main one I did. I've also done cross-stitch samplers. There's a big one hanging downstairs in the kitchen. From a kit that I then had framed. What else have I done? Oh, lots of those cushions that, like needlepoint, is it called? Also from a kit. There are some beautiful ones with some lovely colours. But that was all up till I was, I guess, 30, in my 30s, going up to 40. Just the desire to do something with your hands, and always knitting. I've never not been knitting since I was taught when I was 8 or so. Always knitting on the go. It's better. That's, oh, there's one there. So yeah, but the stitching went sort of by the by until I wish I could remember. Oh, yes, I can remember. There you go. You just need to apply a bit of brain power. It's because when I was in France the first time, when I lived in France the first time, someone suggested to me that in order to improve my French, because I had sort of, I had French up to university, but it's absolutely not the same as being able to converse with people. It gives you a good grounding. But someone said, well, what subject are you interested in? What hobbies do you have? Go and subscribe to a French magazine in that subject. So I went and subscribed to a magazine that was called... So I went to the local newsagents and had a look what there was. And there was one title jumped out at me, which was Quilt Mania, which I believe is published in the Netherlands as well, or it used to be. And I think it's also available in English. But anyway, I subscribed to it in French. So I would every week or every month, I think it came out, when I went to the local town to go to do grocery shopping, I'd go and collect my copy of Quilt Mania and read all the articles in French. And and there, of course, I started wanting to do all the projects that I saw. And at the same time, or maybe because of that, I looked on the internet and discovered the machine piecing and the long arming and the free motion, and taught myself all that. Started buying new fabric. Got a posher sewing machine, which is the one I've still got my Janome 6600 for doing free motion on. And then in 2010 we went to live in England, and I was still doing all that, but it had kind of evolved more into textile art rather than making actual quilts. So I was making pictures, using quilting techniques, piecing, applique, and it was getting gradually more and more sort of, arty. I think a big jump for me was I discovered a kind of quilt called the One Block Wonder, which is from a series of books by a woman called Maxine or Martine, I can't remember. But you take one fabric with a large print, and then you cut it into 60-degree you stack it all up so you get pattern repeats and all that, and you end up with a quilt that's basically a kaleidoscope. But because you cut all these little pieces, and it's not very wasteful of cloth because you're not fussy cutting, there's a design element. So a lot of the work's done for you because you choose a cloth, so all the colours and everything are there, but then there's a design element in laying out the blocks. And I think that, for me, when I discovered that style of quilt and started making a lot of those, was quite a milestone moment, if you like, because I then felt I was designing. But the issue there was that once you designed it all up on your bit of batting, staple gun to the wall or whatever, you then had to sew it all together, and you could see it. It was done in inverted commas. And so, although that was a step forward in terms of designing, in terms of the process, it kind of gave me pause for thought. Do you see what I'm saying? So I started looking for... I made a few of those, and then I started looking for other ways that would engage me more with the process rather than having, knowing how it was going to look before I even started. Do you see what I'm saying? And then I got into more textile collage and, like the earth one that I showed you in Earth Week, and that whole series, and so on and so on. And then during the making of that Earth series, the hand stitching began to creep back in, and I was becoming more aware in general, but about sustainability and, you know, the cost of materials, and I don't mean the financial cost, but the cost to the planet. And around the same time, a friend lent me a book, and I think I'm now in about 2000, or about 12 or so years ago. A friend lent me a book, and in this book, it was a book about Alice Fox, who's an English artist. And in this book was a reference to India Flint. So I went and looked up India Flint, because I think there was a page or two about India's work. And through that I discovered eco-printing, and I did some reading up on it, and I saw that there was so much on the internet, and I couldn't filter the good from the, you know, not so good, the good advice from the not so good advice. And you see beautiful results, or, you know, bright colours and so on, and I now know that that's done with all kinds of chemical assists that I don't want to use, and then you see other people getting less inspiring results, and that's not what I want either. So anyway, in the end I found a real live person not far away from where I lived, or an hour or two's drive actually it was, and went and did a 2-day workshop with an artist called Caroline Bell. And learnt the fundamental basics of eco-printing from her. So that, the discovery of eco-printing, along with the desire to be more sustainable in my art practice, as well as my wider life as a whole, and the fact that the hand stitching had also been creeping back into that whole series that I shared in the Earth Week, all those things came together, and I started doing basically what I'm doing now. And then at one point I saw in the library the Slowstitch book by Claire Wellesley Smith. I took it down off the shelf, I opened it, and it was like, yes, I'm home. This is me. This is what I'm doing. And here we are. And here we are. So there we go. That's my life story in a nutshell. And that's brought me to the end of my little stitch piece for the week, and it's got this weird little frayed dangle, but I'm leaving it. Okay, good. Right, now, and I have not yet mentioned, because I already got in my mind, the words. The wordy words. I need something to stitch it down with. Is that blue going to be enough? Probably. Get the right journal out, because there's a song I can't remember what it's called, but there's a line in it, and it's by Leonard Cohen. Keep your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I shall put a link to it down in the description. So I'm going to write, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Those shall be my words. There's my serious pocket. But if, obviously, as always, if you have another quote about perfection, imperfection, and so forth, you feel free. But I just love that sentiment of that song. That's how the light gets in. I'm going to stitch it. I'm going to stitch it down here. See, in Wonky Wednesday, last week, I talked again about leaving that last line of stitching and using that line to apply your piece to the page, and I could have done it this week, but still I did not. So I've got 2 lines of stitching on top of each other. Yeah. I wish I could remember what that song was called. I don't think it's called That's How the Light Gets In or anything like that, but I've got a feeling it's called something completely different. If you excuse me for just one moment, I'm going to... It's annoying me so much that I'm going to open my tablet and look. If my tablet will switch on. Talk amongst yourselves. How the light gets in, there we go. No, that's apparently a music festival in Hay. Oh, that's interesting. Sorry, I won't get distracted by my tablet. Let's write Cohen next to the word so that we get that. It's called Anthem, yes. Do you know what? The minute I read the very beginning of that word, I said to myself, yes, Anthem. I did know. It was just around a corner of my brain. And I want to sew that to 2 pages. Yes, it's called Anthem. Anyway, I'll put a link down below if you don't know it. To Leonard singing it. On YouTube, I'm sure there is. I'm sure he's doing that somewhere on YouTube. Right. Or you could just look up the words if you know. That is finished off. I don't think I want to do a dangle. I don't want to detract from the gold. That's that gold line, Kintsugi inspired. It's a Kintsugi Leonard Cohen mashup. Yeah, really, really. Sometimes you just go, I like that, don't you? I need a pencil. Here's one. And we are the 6th. Are we the 6th? Yeah, we're 6th of May. 6th of the 5th, 24. K3N kiss. And here we go. I can tell you the exact lyrics. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So I'm going to just write, there is a crack in everything. Sorry about the radiator banging. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Gets in. Did Leonard actually write it? Yes, of course he did. So we'll write Leonard Cohen. Credit where it's due. There we go. And I think on the facing page I'm also going to write wabi, sabi, and Kintsugi, and mono no aware. There we go. You see that? If I write it there, then hopefully you can screenshot or whatever. Wabi sabi, Kintsugi, mono no aware. And then there's my stitch piece, and there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, by Monsieur Leonard Cohen. But yeah, I'm really pleased with it. So let's move that away, that's annoying. So I hope you enjoyed that too, and I hope you have fun stitching your bubbles. And that you liked the chat about perfection and imperfection, and that it resonated in some way. We are all perfectly imperfect. We're all wonky, and we should be proud of that. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and thank you again so much for your support for Cirrus. It really, really, truly helped me. You can't even begin to know how much. So thank you for that, and I look forward to you joining me very, very soon for more cloth tales. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.